and it's Essential Dynamics, the philosophy where we learn why we behave the way we behave as we work and live. I'm Reed McCollum talking today with, as always, with my guru and mentor, Mr. Derek Hudson. Derek, what are you thinking today?
Hey, I'm thinking that we're about to have a fantastic experience, fantastic intellectual experience.
Wow, that would be a first for me.
Yes. Do you have a notepad? Are you ready?
I am ready. Let's go. Are we going to talk about new things, or are you going to teach me?
We have Glen Vanstone with us today.
Glen Vanstone.
And Glen is a former colleague of mine. We started at Edmonton Economic Development within like a couple of weeks of each other, and left Edmonton Economic Development within a couple of weeks of each other in a course of like 7 years or something. And Glen is a mentor to me, particularly in thinking about stuff like frameworks.
Oh,
so he didn't know it at the time, but as we were knocking some stuff around, trying to strengthen Edmonton's economy, he planted some seeds which have come out in Essential Dynamics. So I really have wanted to have him on. And Glen's got his own new venture, and so Glen started New West Networks. So I interested in hearing about that, about Glen's journey to how he became a guy who's an expert in helping businesses grow. And then if we get to it, I really want to talk about the driver's part of Essential Dynamics, because Glen taught me a lot about that. So tons of stuff, and Glen hasn't even had a chance to say anything yet, so we have to stop. Glen, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much, Derek. I'm not sure about the expert part, but it's a pleasure to be here. Always have an opinion, willing to share. Reed, nice to meet you, sir.
Very nice to meet you, sir. I am looking forward to what you have to say. Now, first of all, how did you come up with your framework? What is your framework?
Well, I'm not sure. It's not my framework. It's just kind of how I was looking at the economy in general. Obviously, with Derek and Edmonton Economic Development, spent a lot of time thinking and working within the economy and about the economy, both here and abroad. So my framework is really kind of how I was approaching what our needs are and where we need to go with respect to our economic future. So that kind of framework also kind of sang along very much with the idea of Essential Dynamics, the purpose, what direction we need to go, why, what the competition against us was, the drives that we had working for us, and the things that were holding us back. Excellent.
Well, it sounds like you can illustrate our philosophy very well. I'd like this perspective anyway. It's not, I'd be very interested in hearing more. Where did you start your quest?
Interestingly enough, quest, of course, changes over career, right? So backtracking a little bit to tie it in with Essential Dynamics. Alberta born and bred, always been around here, wanted to get out of high school and earn a wage, young man, let's earn a buck and live life. Shortly after high school, that didn't work out. So ended up trying to go back to school, ran into the first recession period, the National Energy Program, and ended up getting what was supposed to be a short part-time job working over at Air Canada at the International Airport. That translated into a 22-year career with Air Canada on the ground side, the airport side of the business. And it was traumatic. That was the time when the industry itself was transforming from what it was to the direction it is today. A decades-long battle for control of Canada's skies, everything from restructuring, bankruptcies, 9/11, all of that process and automation, et cetera. Really kind of an interesting time to formulate the ideas. And it's really kind of where I think maybe my path began, or my quest, when, because of all these industry forces, my company at the time made that strategic decision to, we'll call it, abandon the community in favor of the fortress hub mentality that they were using to deal with global aviation change. That didn't sit very well with me, and I had chose this place to raise my family, and so I wanted to see that the community succeeded, despite having something like a major carrier say, "No, not you. We're going to go over here." So that began my separation from Air Canada. But in that time, I also had a role during the bankruptcy process, where a number of us were seconded from our regular jobs and tasked with this 2-year assignment to take waste out of the organization. We had to reduce costs. And so when I think about Purpose A and Purpose B, or X and Y, here you had a carrier that was, its role from an everyday kind of deliverable was air service for Canadians and communities to move passengers back and forth, and Purpose Y, which was save the company from further bankruptcy and destruction by tearing things apart. So I was an agent of change who hated change myself, but I was accountable for that process. So we had these two dynamics going on at the same time. And that was interesting. But underlying all of it was that, how do I help my community succeed when it's been kind of diminished, if you will, in terms of what I thought was essential for growth, meaning access to markets. And that's been a theme through all of my career ever since. Eventually got tired of chasing airplanes, went over to the airports, and I was going to keep my boots on the ground. Ended up very quickly in a role of promoting the community into international markets and other jurisdictions on the basis of connectivity. Through air service, how does a community connect with global markets, with other opportunities? It becomes an essential part of modern business life. And so here I am in 5 continents doing hundreds of presentations promoting the opportunity that Alberta and our community and region in particular represented. And it was that when it started to form, I think maybe some of the detail that manifested itself into the drivers and constraints piece. The fundamental question that I was wrestling with was, why is it that communities differ? What makes one city thrive, one community or region thrive, and others not? They all have the same essential ingredients. Is it luck? Is it timing? What is it that makes one community able to be more resilient, more prosperous in essentially the same kind of an economic climate at a macro level compared to the next one? So this is what I wrestled with when I talk often about the blessing and the curse, where I had the opportunity to see how other communities responded to their opportunities, embraced those opportunities, or dealt with them. And when I would fly back here, it became kind of very close. Canada itself was not very global in that perspective. Other communities had far broader kind of a global awareness of what those opportunities are. And yet it was a curse for me to come back here to a certain extent and still wrestle with the status quo. So that's where it kind of tied in.
So Glen, we met at Edmonton Economic Development. Did Edmonton Economic Development find you, or did you find Edmonton Economic Development? Because it sounds like you're already on a mission to get to bring the community into where the potential that you saw others had.
Yeah, I got asked. I was invited to come in and chat with the team when I left the airports, and so we kind of found each other. I saw Edmonton Economic Development as a broader brush to work with versus primarily just the scope of air service connectivity. This allowed me to deal with a broader spectrum of businesses and interests and all those kind of tangible and intangibles associated with something as complex as an economic system of a community in a region.
How do you, if I may jump in here, Glen, how do you measure success in a community? Like how do you say one community is thriving and one is not?
Well, I think that it's always been a challenge of how do you measure prosperity? How do you measure thrive? People talk about, hey, GDP group numbers are up and all that kind of great stuff, or employment numbers are up. But that to me was never satisfactory. What made a community more successful than another? Well, certainly there was the economic angle was a community able to continue to increase in terms of number of businesses and jobs and opportunities, and at the same time cultivate a more exciting market and more environment place for people to live, grow, and raise families. Part of it also was, is it a place where businesses can prosper in their space and be successful? And I always had a globalist view in that global context. And so on one side, you have communities that are excellent in one, and others have a more broader success spectrum, if you will, that are able to capitalize on all that. Measuring success becomes something that moves a lot, but I think everybody knows when their community is successful, thriving, or prosperous, and when it isn't.
Everybody knows. That's fascinating. Hey, Glen. So in the context of where you're setting us up here in helping communities, and let me, if I just kind of frame it up this way, when we talk about the path in essential dynamics, we talk about the drivers that help you move forward, the natural forces that help you move forward, and the constraints that are the things that hold you back. When you were at Air Canada and you were fighting waste, it was all kind of on the constraint side, right? Like, what are the things that we're doing that aren't adding value? Let's get rid of them. I'm really interested, and there's tons of work on lean and constraints and Six Sigma that's been done for many years. That's really helpful, but I always feel like the driver's side is neglected.
Very much.
Tell me about your view on drivers, whether it's in economies or for companies. What have you learned about that?
Well, framing that up, it's an interesting question because you're absolutely right. Everybody can tell you what's wrong, but not easily are they able to tell you what really works and moves their businesses forward. So frame this up a little bit more. Toward the end of at the EDC, we were working on a strategic plan, economic plan for Edmonton. Any strategy is meant to overcome some defined challenge. Otherwise, why would you have a strategy? It's not a calendar item. It's meant to deal with something that you have to overcome. For me, it came down to what was the Alberta/the Edmonton condition that we were faced. And I've always framed this out to say that, quite frankly, our current economy is built to optimize on economic conditions that no longer exist. They did before, they don't, but we're built for something that we're misaligned. And what is that? So put it in another context, a lot of businesses would talk about the opportunity of Edmonton region, but in a different way that they do in other markets, for example. They would say, Alberta is where you go to make money, not to earn it. And it's an important distinction when you think about what's the makeup of our economy. So in that challenge, how do we reshape our economic system?
I just want to jump in. I don't understand the difference between making money and earning it.
Well, think about it as Alberta had prospered as an economic engine for so long, right? Canada's economic engine was part of that phrasing. Quite frankly, Alberta lives on investment capital. That's what drove the Alberta economy. That's what drove businesses. So making money was getting in on the action. There was billions and billions of dollars coming into the province virtually unsolicited. It was energy dollars that were pouring into Alberta. So businesses wouldn't build headquarters. They would send branch operations because they wanted to make money versus building a business up. That's a big issue we have, is we don't scale businesses in this province.
I see.
It's a Canadian issue too. So if we think about that context, economic systems are really complex, multiple variables. You had Dr. Clark in who talked about complexity versus what's complicated. Complexity has all these variables of interplay. So the challenge is thinking about how do we affect an economic system. This is where the idea of what drivers and constraints go through. When we talk to the 1,000 business voices in preparation for the strategy plan, they would all talk about what was holding them back. It was very easy for businesses to identify their barriers because it was the things that they were trying to deal with on a daily basis. But when you turn around and say, well, what drives your business? It got much weaker. Some of these guys were having, what do you mean, what drives my business? Customers drive my business. No, but every business has customers, otherwise you're not in business. So what drives you forward? And that was really kind of hard. It was difficult for them to articulate. It was a particular element that was important. So we had to work through all of that and try to sift that out. The idea, I think, that we were building the drivers and constraints model around was, hold it, let's make something here is more fundamental, which was, you talk about purpose and path and how that applies to individuals. And businesses are just a conglomeration of individuals, same as communities. My underlying belief is that every single day, everybody wakes up with the intention of creating value, to fulfilling their purpose, whether it's help your family grow, keep your kids safe, build your career or aspire to some achievement. Everybody wants to create value. That's a natural energy. So growth, translated from that, says that economic power really resides in that natural energy, the desire to create value, to roll up sleeves, to put some energy to accomplish something better than it was the day before. So in an unconstrained environment, you have unfettered growth, right? Everything would grow if there were no constraints. So you need the constraints as much as you need the drivers. It's the balance of what drivers and the strength of the constraints that perhaps can be molded. Can you affect a given constraint in order to augment a particular driver that will create the conditions that allow businesses and the communities to thrive and prosper? That's the fundamental theory behind the idea of how do we take an economy that is not built for the current state or the future state, and how do we manipulate that to create the conditions by which businesses and communities can thrive and prosper. So it's fundamental, this balance of drivers and constraints.
So I love what you're saying. I'm sorry, Derek. I love what you're saying because you are embracing, in fact, even endorsing the constraints that using what we consider often opposition or disadvantage or hurdles that we must jump. And what you're just saying, what I heard was that we need those in order to grow.
Yes, you need that kind of balance. And so back to my equation, what makes one community thrive and prosper in current times and others fall behind because they failed to adjust. And so is it our intention, or should it be our intention, not to just say we need more investment because that's what we're built for, or we need to create the condition, the balance of drivers and constraints that allow businesses to be able to compete and win in other markets. And I make that distinction because that adds a new dimension. The imbalance that I talk about is we have way too many wealth servicing companies. Back to the story, people come here to make money, not earn it, versus the number of businesses that are actually generating wealth by creating goods and services that the world wants. And my argument also is that the world wants what we've got. They want good food, they want good health, medicines, they want education, and they want the technology to control their environment. Light when it's dark, heat when it's cold. What is Alberta made up of? We have a fantastic healthcare system. We've got a strong, durable, and lengthy agricultural base. We sure as heck have technologies around the environment, and we have these educational platforms. So we've got all the stuff that the world really wants, but what we don't have is the environment that allows businesses to say, okay, Alberta, it's not enough anymore. We need to compete and win in a global arena. And we don't do that very well in a large statement. Like, there are good companies here that are really kicking butt globally. But as a culture, as an economy, we don't have those conditions that celebrate, encourage, and really formulate how do we take great companies or good companies that have done very well servicing the Alberta market and help them transform into businesses that can compete and win internationally. Because when you generate wealth from beyond and it comes back here, it translates into growth, scaling, jobs, opportunities. And that, to me, is the path that we need to think about. Balance the drivers and constraints, create the conditions that make it desirable for companies to say, I was great at making widgets for the oil sector. Can I make doohickeys that the world wants in some other space? And if I can do that, let's go.
So, Glen, this is really inspiring, and you learned this when you were a public servant, and now you're an entrepreneur. Tell me about your new venture and how it ties into this thinking that you've developed.
Well, I think that now you have introduced what's happened over the last 2 years, right? So COVID occupied everything, put companies into stasis mode, again, in general terms. But now we're emerging from what is a post-pandemic environment. Well, the issues that we had prior to COVID are the same economic issues we have post-COVID, just with different color. The work that we're doing is really targeting those businesses that have reached that point where they're saying, I was great in what worked before, but I need to compete and win in new markets. And so what we're doing is focusing on those companies that need to scale and grow in new markets, really kind of stretch out. How do I take my services or my products? How do I customize them? Bruce was talking about product development versus project development, or product management versus project management. And how do we help those organizations say, I got to do something. I don't know where to go. I don't know what I need to do next. I don't know what to do with my organization, but I know I need to go and compete and win. And if I'm going to be durable and grow in the long term. So I think there's more of those companies, and that's a space that's currently a vacuum in I'll call it in the public context right now. Too often we let companies get from that, great, you're a company now, good luck, but we don't do a good job at all, or we don't have a system or a culture that says, so I'm 50 employees, how do I get to 500? And I can't do that if I stick my nose just solely in the Alberta market. I need to get into South America. I need to get into areas that are new to me. We work with companies that have kind of got to that space, but they're also humble. They're willing to learn. They understand the challenge, but they're ready to roll up sleeves and get after it. And that's the space where we're adding in a little bit of what we know, what we've learned, and see if we can help them be successful.
So we should probably ask, what's the name of the company and how can people find you?
It's New West Networks, New West. And the easiest thing is to give me a shout, drop me a line, Glen at New West Networks, and we'll see what we can do. Again, there are companies out there that have merged from pandemic world and are looking at the landscape and saying, I'm at the end. Where do I go now? And if they're willing to learn, willing to do and put the legwork in, they can compete and win.
Glen, we'll have to check in with you and find out more about how some of those success stories are going and how some of those local, to us, to Alberta, companies are thriving, and we want to know. And so we'll be checking in with you again. I want to thank you very much for joining us today and telling us a little bit about your journey and how it started. I so appreciate what you've had to say, and especially your work. Please continue to help our economy and help people in general. Thank you very much, Glen Vanstone, our guest here today in Essential Dynamics. His contact information will be on the show notes. Derek, how do people reach you?
You can find me at derekhudson.ca on the web, and I look forward to hearing what people think about what we're doing here on Essential Dynamics.
I look forward to that too. Until next time, I'm Reed McCollum, and for Bryn Griffiths in the studio, consider your quest.